for our discussion tonight about the Hollywood and the new aristocracy. Hollywood celebrities have long possessed lots of fame and power in American culture, and they've had connections in politics for some time, but things, it seems to me, have somewhat changed. Nowadays, actors, directors, singers comment ever more frequently on political issues and oftentimes much more effectively in politics than politicians. Politicians, on the other hand, seek the blessing of entertainment celebrities the way politicians used to go back to the nobility of the older ages for their blessing. Everything is political nowadays. Everything is about celebrity. And perhaps you could say we have our first celebrity president, although there have been cases of other political figures who come out of Hollywood. We can include in this more broadly, which we will in our conversation, the media generally, because the media is increasingly part of entertainment as well. Are we living in a time of a new aristocracy, is our question. So we've put together a panel of interesting friends of ours to talk about it, who actually know something about this, coming from different angles, if you will. We're going to first hear from Paul Cantor. Professor Cantor is a good friend of ours. He's the Barrett Professor of English at the University of Virginia. He's a rare academic, not only because he's a good English professor at the University of Virginia, which is itself a rarity, but he's someone who's very comfortable speaking about Shakespeare, Churchill, or The Walking Dead. And he's written a book, one of my favorite titles of all time, Gilligan Unbound. He's a keen student of American culture, both historical and modern. Secondly, we'll hear from Beverly Hallberg. She's the founder and president of District Media Group. She's a media coach and very frequent and good cable news guest herself. And she's built a career about being an expert on how power players use the media to advance their personal profiles and careers. So she's seen kind of both sides of this conversation and can comment on that. And then lastly, we'll hear from James Taranto, who is the editorial features editor at the Wall Street Journal. And perhaps you know him best because for quite some time he wrote Best of the Web at the Journal's website. And as the lines between entertainment, politics, and the media have blurred, which I alluded to earlier, we asked him because he has been a longtime observer and a very good critic of the media. So with that, we've asked each to talk just for 6 to 8 minutes or so to get us going and then leave time for plenty of conversation. So with that, Paul, welcome.
Thank you, and thanks for the introduction. I thought I'd begin by defending Hollywood in this sense, that although we're talking about something that is new, it really does have a deep history in the United States past, and in particular, I'd say if Hollywood's our new aristocracy, we, the American people, created it. And here, Mark Twain can be very helpful to us, especially his novel, Huckleberry Finn, because there Twain deals with a paradox that in America, the land of freedom, Americans crave aristocrats. Twain understood that America is the land of the fresh start, but that also means it's the land of the false start. It's the land of the entrepreneur, of the self-made man. It's also, therefore, the land of the con man. And that's the great theme, actually, of Huckleberry Finn. And in particular, what Twain noticed about American democracy is that the easiest way to be a con man was to pretend to be a European aristocrat. And therefore, you have this famous Duke and King in Huckleberry Finn, one man claiming to be the Duke of Bridgewater, or Bilgewater, as he's sometimes referred to, and another one claiming to be Louis XVII. And the people of the Mississippi Valley accept this. And this really upset Twain. I want to read you a couple of quotations from him. It showed that he thought this was going to be a real danger in American democracy. It is a saddening thought, but we cannot change our nature. We are all alike, we human beings, and in our blood and bone and ineradicably we carry the seeds out of which monarchies and aristocracies are grown. Worship of gods, that's G-A-U-D-S, titles, distinctions, power. And even more pointedly, he wrote of the American people and their attitude towards aristocrats. While they scoff with their mouths, they reverence them in their hearts. The Democrat, that is with a small d, the Democrat will never live who will marry a Democrat into his family when he can get a duke. And so Twain feared that we would be subject to whoring after aristocracies in our country. It's a little known and noticed feature. The U.S. Constitution has a provision that prohibits titles of nobility. It shows that the Founding Fathers were worried about just this issue. And indeed, we see Twain's point everywhere in American history. You see it in American Anglophilia, which I'm particularly subject to living in Charlottesville, Virginia, with its fox hunting. That is, we worship Princess Di, like we were so deprived as a nation, we didn't have a princess, so we attached ourselves to Diana. We're fascinated with the English royal family whenever they wed and have these great ceremonies. And this has spilled over into all sorts of areas of American life, into sports. There are so many areas in which when someone distinguishes himself or herself, we confer royal titles. Babe Ruth was the Sultan of Swat, for example. You see it even in jazz, the most democratic of American arts, and yet we had Duke Ellington and Count Basie. Where does that come from? And of course, we see it in Hollywood. We somehow, in democratic America, we crave aristocracy. We crave some kind of glamour. Now, Camille Paglia has written very interestingly about this in that famous book of hers, Sexual Personae, where she points out that Hollywood produces not just aristocrats, but veritable gods. And she pointed out particularly of movie stars in the days when there used to be big screens, that they had pretty much all the attributes of gods. They are immortal. We're still living with the screen stars of the past. They are perpetually young, at first through the miracles of plastic surgery during their careers, and then, of course, by the fact that these images of them as young prevail. They are, at least in the era of the big screen, larger than life. And Paglia argued, there's a reason why people throughout human history had gods. People want to look up to something, want to dream of a life better than theirs, and Hollywood fulfilled that function very well throughout much of its history. So in a sense, what we're looking at has deep roots in American history and in certain needs the American people feel. But now we're faced with a new situation, this business of celebrity. That celebrity has emerged as the overarching category of all public life. It used to be we could talk about politicians and public figures as one category. We could speak about athletes as another category. We could speak about people in the entertainment business as celebrities. But now, and I think this is largely the result of the media, these categories have broken down to the point where there pretty much only is celebrity, this business of being famous for being famous. And we've got a lot of people like that in our culture. And at first, I think television encouraged that, and now the social media are. And the breakdown of these distinctions means that indeed these aristocrats we create in Hollywood now feel they are more than entertainers. They now feel that they're qualified to comment on political matters. We have politicized so much of our society. I mean, nothing is shielded from political considerations now, so that entertainers are challenged to have political opinions. Sports figures are challenged to have political opinions. And the other side of politicizing everything is that everybody now has some kind of political position and feels not just entitled, but really enjoined to come up with a political opinion. And I think that, again, I think recent presidential campaigns have shown that, and most notably this most recent one. I think one of Trump's advantages was that people already knew him from TV. They knew him better than they knew their politicians from all his exposure on television. So I think we need to be aware of the deeper roots of this phenomenon so that we don't see it as a mere aberration in the history of the United States. But I do think we have to consider the consequences of a new media situation that has turned this into a larger problem than it ever has been before. I'll stop there.
Great, thank you. Beverly.
Yeah, I want to pick up on where you left off, and that is about President Trump and what I would refer to as his authenticity. A statement I often get from individuals who I work with, if I ask them, okay, we're going to do media training today, prepare you for public speeches or prepare you for media interviews, I'll say, how can I help you with that? And I've had several people say, I want you to train me to speak like Donald Trump. And then I promptly say, well, I'm happy to give you your money back because I train people to do the opposite, which then begs this whole question, why has it worked for him? And that's because, as you were just mentioning, they had already seen him do it on TV over the years. They had already seen him fire people. It was true to his brand. It was authentic. And so I wanted to focus my portion just on the branding that we're seeing in social media. So I would agree that Hollywood is not just what we think of old school Hollywood, which is the movie star that we see on the red carpet. Don't hear much else from them other than them walking down the red carpet. It has really gone into this term of celebrity and people building their brands. And that is through social media. A lot of that is through that platform. And I had a question, so I think there are a lot of millennials in here. By raise of hands, who in here does not have cable? Does not on a regular basis watch TV? Who in here does not have a TV? Raise your hand if you have, yeah, raise your hand if you have Instagram and or Twitter. Almost everyone, almost everyone. So I think what's very fascinating is the traditional form of media has been changing to everything that is going online. So even if you look at the cable networks, they know that their fan base, their audience is going to be going away over time. Everything's going to move on online. And so what this has done is opened up this huge avenue for celebrity, whether that's sports, movies, TV star, fill in the blank of who that is, who can share their brand with you, the follower, on a daily basis, which in many ways is a good thing as you're developing a brand, but it has then opened them up to, do we comment on what's going on day to day? And I think there's been a decision by many celebrities trying to figure out, does it help my brand to talk about Donald Trump? And for many, they thought it has. And many, they want to comment. And I would even say, and the other side of that, it's hard to be a musician these days or a sports star without somebody asking you what you think about what's going on the national front. And so it also puts celebrity in a tough position, because what then happens to their audience when clearly the audience is going to be divided on what they're saying politically. So it's an interesting time in how social media has played a role in this. One of the things I wanted to point out is that when it comes to the brand aspect, this has gone poorly for certain celebrities who have used the platform of Twitter or Instagram to share their political opinions, and they've had to backtrack. One that sticks out to me, if you all follow Jamil Hill, who is an ESPN sportscaster. She called Trump a white supremacist, and her boss, ESPN, came down on her pretty hard, because what do you do? Maybe even the CEOs agree with what she's saying, but they know not all their audience does. So you're seeing this very interesting divide, and what does this mean when somebody hires you, and yet you as an individual are tweeting out what your thoughts are, but people are always going to associate you with the workplace that you have. And so that's where I'm also seeing some disagreement in how celebrities want to handle the fact that they personally have an opinion, but they also have a boss. We're even seeing this with the NFL. The NFL is a good example of this. When you're a sports star, they want to come to you, the reporters do, and see what you think about the national anthem, whether you're going to stand, whether you're going to sit. And depending on what team you play for, there could be blowback depending on the decision that you make on that. So even the private enterprise, the people that are celebrities that they hire, there's a lot of division in how, as an individual, these players, these celebrities are allowed to speak on these issues. But here's another thing that social media has provided, and that is, if very few people are watching your show, or I'm going to use award show as an example, that's when we see a lot of celebrity talk about politics, they then have the avenue of social media to, on repeat, make their statement out there. So we even heard Robert De Niro, the Tony Awards. Did anybody here actually watch the Tony Awards when he said so? We have one person, good for you. You watched the Tony Awards.
Nobody has a television.
Nobody has a television, exactly. But where you do see it is on social media that's going to play the clip. And then that is how news networks are now picking up their news. What is on Twitter, and then putting that out there. So what I see as a problem with using social media as a brand is that it allows people to be as provocative as possible because they don't have the same censorship issues that you may have in some traditional broadcasts. But it's the more provocative you can be, the more likely you're going to be covered by the news, and the more likely the news is going to cover it if social media is putting it out there, if it goes viral, if it's being retweeted. So there's also a battle right now, in my opinion, of who can say the most provocative things in order to get more coverage. And if you are, let's say, a B-list celebrity, this may be a tool that you want to use just to be in the news again. So things like that can happen. And then we have the added aspect to this, and this is something you were saying earlier, Dr. Spalding, which is we have a president who's a celebrity, who also tweets and also loves to rail against Hollywood. The one that stands out to me was when Meryl Streep at the Golden Globes in 2017 made a comment about Donald Trump, and what he said he wasn't doing this, but she said that he was making fun of somebody who was disabled in the audience, and there's that gifs of this, or video of it, of his body language imitating what she says is imitating somebody who is disabled. And he retweeted, the President of the United States retweets about an actress, the Golden Globes. The part that I thought he went too far was he actually knocked her acting skills, which objectively, she's a great actress. You could disagree with her politics. President Trump always takes it one step too far with his tweets. But we have a president, this is the way that he wants to respond, and he is a celebrity. And people have asked, what do you think about him tweeting? Some people love it, some people hate it. In some ways, it's a brilliant strategy for him in that he's able to bypass mainstream media. Hands down, it's one thing that he has been able to do and really get his message out regardless of whether or not he thinks CNN or MSNBC are covering him fairly. But at the same time, there's a huge responsibility because we are talking about the office of the president. So this is the Twitter, these are the tweets of the office of the president, and also this is an individual. And sometimes I think that gets him into trouble, and I would say often isn't helpful to him. Even kind of a side note to show how things are so different right now because of social media. If I'm working with a client who really wants some media attention on a topic, we work on getting them on Fox and Friends roughly the 6:30 a.m. hour when we know the president is in town and is likely to watch. We try to tie a poll to their issue that's favorable to him because he's likely to tweet about the segment if it's in that time frame, if it's on Fox and Friends, it's positive to him and has a positive poll attached to it. Like, that is actual strategy now. Like, get on Fox and Friends so the president will tweet about this. Think about the president getting to Twitter wars with different individuals. I even think of his friendship with Kanye West, which highly entertaining, by the way. If you do not follow Kanye West, you should. It's very entertaining. But when you think about, you have this celebrity and the president communicating via Twitter, and everybody loses their minds over it. And so that brings up the other point that celebrities commenting on politics only is acceptable to other celebrities if they agree with the perspective. So there's so much blowback for any celebrity that doesn't take the specific liberal perspective of what politics should be. So those who do take a brave step and go against the flow, they get a lot of hate for that. I also think even with Kanye West, I thought it was very fascinating that all of a sudden conservatives were like, he's our guy. I'm like, you may want to look into that a little bit more. You can really like his music, support him for going against the flow, but you may want to talk to him a little bit more about his policy ideas to see if you're actually in the same boat. So I will wrap all this up to say I think there's a lot of positives in social media, the ability to use our free speech rights, to get out there, but I think when it comes to celebrity, I think sadly too many people follow their favorite stars, sports stars, celebrities, movie stars, fill in the blank, and think that that is the only way to think about these issues. So there are pros and cons to it.
Thank you. James?
Well, thank you, Matt.
Tell us about the media elites.
Yeah.
Yes, so I don't really have anything to say about Hollywood. I don't pay much attention to Hollywood. I do own a television set, but the last time I paid for a ticket and watched a movie in the theater, I believe, was July 2013. And that was because I was stuck in Wyoming going to the wedding of a friend who's actually a Hillsdale graduate, and I had a couple of hours to kill, and there was a movie theater right across. It was whatever the latest Star Trek movie was. I think the second Star Trek movie in the latest series. I think I watched the third one when it came out on Netflix. So I'm going to talk about the news media instead. And I think what we've seen in the news media has been a kind of a disillusion of an aristocracy. The news media do not have the same kind of respect and authority that they did for several decades of the post-war era. Thinking about something that happened this week, I believe it was Monday, it was announced that the New York Daily News, once the largest circulation newspaper in the country 30 years ago, was cutting its editorial staff by 50%. You saw a lot of articles about it that basically read the obituary of the New York Daily News. It's probably not going to be around too much longer, is the assumption. Now, this occasioned a lot of schadenfreude among conservatives, because the New York Daily News has really just gone insane over the past 3, 4, 5 years. They have become what the New York Times would be if the New York Times set out to make itself grotesque. That is, ideologically, they're like the New York Times, but the levels of vulgarity and just unhingedness. So, for example, they routinely depict President Trump as a scary clown. They have photos of him and they doctor it up to make it look like he's wearing clown makeup. The other week they accused him of treason. They do this crazy stuff about the NRA. They call the NRA a terrorist organization. They call Wayne LaPierre, the head of the NRA, Jihadi Wayne. One of their headlines was, "God isn't fixing this." They were editorializing against thoughts and prayers after there's a shooting, because we need gun control. So they've just gone out of their minds. And so there was a lot of schadenfreude, and people kind of thought, well, look what happens. The Daily News goes loony left, and they have business problems, cause and effect. I think that's a post hoc, ergo propter hoc fallacy, however. In fact, if anything, I think commercial considerations are driving the media in that direction. All right. For one thing, it's just cheaper to produce stupid left-wing commentary than it is to produce serious reporting, right? And I notice the people I know who are on the Daily News editorial board don't seem to have been among those who were cut. So these crazy editorials are still gonna come. There's also an appetite for this. It's not a universal appetite, but a lot of people really like reading just crazy commentary that reinforces their political prejudices. I'm sure that's true of people on our side too, although we're a little less aware of it. And one of the things that I think we've seen, one of the things that's been driving this, ironically, is the rise of conservative media, which has led to a sort of segmentation. So for example, Fox News comes on the scene. I think it debuted in 1996. sometime around then. And Fox News is a corrective to what everyone understands to be the liberal bias of the media. Fox News portrays itself as fair and balanced. And if you're conservative, you saw it that way. It was a needed corrective. So what happens? Do the other broadcast networks move more toward the center? Well, no, I think what's happened instead is Fox News gets the conservative audience. So the CNN audience and later the MSNBC audience becomes a much more liberal audience, and CNN and MSNBC pander to their audience. So CNN, which used to be, which used to try to play it straight, of course it had the same liberal bias that most of the media do, now is like kind of crazy. Watch Brian Stelter's Reliable Sources sometimes. I don't really watch it, but I noticed it was on in the gym one Saturday or Sunday morning, and the chyron, the letters on the screen said something like, "The press's job is to call Trump a liar." I mean, it actually said that. This guy's Dan Rather on as a regular guest, respected senior journalist, never mind that he was disgraced and run out of CBS almost 15 years ago because of a fake story about George W. Bush. Perhaps the best example of this segmentation is the Washington Post, which to my mind has seen the steepest decline in its journalistic standards of any journalistic entity since the Trump era began. And why? Well, I think the answer is the Washington Post is the newspaper. Their main readership is the political and administrative elite in this part of the country. And so these are people who read these crazy rantings by people like Max Boot and Jennifer Rubin and Michael Gerson, and they love this stuff because it reinforces their prejudices. Never mind that none of these people ever have anything new or interesting to say. One of my favorite examples of this, and I think that this is the biggest journalistic scandal of the past decade, maybe of our young century, although I seem to be the only one who thinks this, but it never fails to outrage me. In 2011, after the shooting in Tucson, in which Congresswoman Gabby Giffords was gravely wounded, there was an immediate kind of rush to assume that this was politically motivated, which is not a crazy assumption. A member of Congress gets shot, seems to have been the target. You think, all right, maybe there's some ideological motivation. But it quickly became clear there wasn't. The shooter was just a nut who had no recognizable political motivation. The New York Times nonetheless runs an editorial after this is known in which they say, well, it would be facile to draw a direct connection, but the Republican Party and their most strident supporters in the media bear much of the blame for this, for the atmosphere of that's given rise to this violence. I'm paraphrasing here, but this is a pretty close paraphrase. So what they're doing is they're not making a factually incorrect statement, but they are lying by innuendo. They're drawing a connection that is actually not there. And you notice that what they're doing is they're targeting their rivals in the media, people who are challenging their authority. So I wrote a column about it at the time called The Authoritarian Media, saying there's a conflict going on, and what's at stake is authority. The New York Times doesn't have the authority it once had, so it's becoming increasingly unscrupulous in asserting its authority, and it's just outright lying, which journalists aren't supposed to do. Another manifestation of this effort to restore authority is this fact-check journalism, where a journalist will take a statement by a politician and then, or sometimes by a pundit or somebody else, and purport to say this statement is true, this statement is false, this statement is half true, pants on fire, all this stuff. Well, it's kind of an inversion of what actual journalism is, because these fact-check journalists are setting themselves forth as authorities on the facts. We're going to determine what the facts are. We're going to say this statement of President Trump is a lie. And then, by the way, the Washington Post particularly does this. They keep count of the number of statements that they've said are lies, and then they say, like, Donald Trump lies an average of 6.8 times a week. It's just totally bogus data. It's totally made up. It's all subjective. They come up with these numbers that give an illusion of precision. It's all nonsense. But this is their way of reasserting their authority, or trying to reassert their authority. But of course, what happens with all this is journalists end up looking like political players. They are openly taking sides. You know, Trump is a liar. Well, if you say Trump is a liar, you're kind of taking sides there. You can argue that sometimes Trump lies, that some of the things he says are certainly debatable. But if you're approaching journalism with the idea of, I'm going to show every day, I'm going to wake up every day and show that Trump is a liar, you're basically just doing opposition research. And so all of these efforts to maintain journalistic authority end up breaking down journalistic authority. And I'm not sure what the solution is to this, if any, although I think the Wall Street Journal is still doing a pretty good job. I think what we've seen is a breakdown of what used to be an authoritative and, one could say, aristocratic institution.
Of course, James, you know, democracy dies in darkness.
Yeah, you know, what's funny about that is it's either the New York Sun or the Baltimore Sun, I forget which, that has long had the slogan, "It shines for all." Why would you say democracy dies in darkness? It's like so grim. It's the worst advertising slogan.
Because they're grim. I'm asking a quick question, then we'll go to the audience. But I actually want to try to connect some of these arguments here, because Beverly, you've suggested that, and I think James' comments drive this. What's driving? I mean, technology is actually driving some of this. The availability of easy technology. You know, social media. I mean, they're having their problems. So, for instance, Facebook, which its stock is down today. If anybody's noticed.
Quite a bit.
Has algorithms that now have made Hillsdale's courses on Shakespeare politically causing disclaimers. This is ridiculous. Yeah. Is technology driving them towards politics, or the politics of the left, in the case of the media, driving them to use more technology? Are these things coming together here, or is this something different?
Yeah. I don't think it's one answer. I think there's a variety of things. Talking about Facebook and even Twitter, the president did tweet about Twitter today, saying that there's the ability to, with Twitter, what they're doing is masking some of the search features of conservatives, prominent conservatives out there. It looks like it is happening. They have their own excuse for it, their own reason for it. But I think these companies also are in a very hard position, because there is horrible stuff said on Twitter, for example. And you don't even have to say who you are on Twitter, and a lot of bad things are said, death threats, fill in the blank. And so I think sometimes they're in a hard position of knowing, how do you censor this and what do you do? At the same time, I do think that there is bias. They just don't always see it. So whether it's the mainstream news media or what we're seeing with technology, people who think they're being non-biased or biased in what they view as offensive.
So is these new medias, these new technologies revealing to us what we've always known, that our cultural elites are increasingly more and more liberal?
It's not just revealing it, it's proving it.
I mean, just giving evidence of it.
Think how much of American politics in the past 3 years have turned on emails. The quest for emails, what's dug up in emails. I mean, conversations like that undoubtedly went on for centuries in the dark corridors of power. But now you can actually see in print what people said, and I think that has permanently transformed our politics. And it's amazing how dense these public figures have been in not realizing they used to know don't leave a paper trail, but they don't seem to know don't leave an email trail. And they're very naive about delete buttons and to think they can actually get rid of this stuff. And it's like 80% of our politics has been over emails, tweets.
For a long time as a scholar, I thought that the advent of email and technology was going to diminish historical sources for presidential studies and things like this, but it turns out to be exactly the opposite.
Yeah, just like the paperless office. I would just add one more thing. If we're talking about technologies that have disrupted the news business, don't forget about Craigslist, which pretty much destroyed the classified ad market, which was what kept local newspapers afloat.
interesting point.